the history of Arabia pre-Islam is just thought of as the Jahiliyyah, the ignorant time.
Yeah, I don't like that name because I mean, pre-Islamic Arabia is very, very rich. It's very rich in its poetry, it's very rich in its values, it's very rich in its history, even its accomplishment.
I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
Professed values of the Western countries, democracy and constitutional and human rights, at least they should speak about this.
And it's like, I feel like religion just is making it worse. They say they believe in God, but I think they're just anxious.
Before we talk about politics, let's look at the fundamental things.
That when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
And it requires people with guts to follow God in an era that everyone does whatever is right in their eyes.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently? Or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah Initiative, conversation without compromise.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Al-Ma'idah Initiative podcast. I am joined today by Abdul Rahman bin Noor, my friend, not just from the internet now, but now from real life. A couple weeks ago, we were exploring the deserts and old settlements north of Riyadh, and now we're here to do a two-part series. This week, we're covering religion in Arabia before Islam, and next week, we're going to be talking about everything the Bible says about Arabia. So, Abdul Rahman, welcome back.
Well, thank you. You have more time to prepare. It's next week, but I'll try my best in what I can give you guys about pre-Islamic Arabia. Pre-Islamic Arabia is a very, very interesting period, and I think the part of it that's close to the advent of Islam was very well documented. So, I mean, we have something to go back on.
So, let's kick off with something you've told me before. If you're allowed to talk about this, if not, I'll cut it out. But in the Islamic accounts, there's a figure in Najd called Muslem. And he's one of these central figures in the Ridda Wars. So you have a contestation that the sort of mainstream version of that might be a little off. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for asking this. This subject, actually intrigues me a lot because it's close to home. I wish I had we had more time. I would have showed you where the battle was and where the graves of the Sahaba are. The gravesite is still there. So his name is Muslem bin Habib al-Hanafi. And Musaylama is, to make something smaller in Arabic, you sometimes add the ya, like Kitab, Kutayib, smaller than the Kitab. So Musaylama is a miniaturing his name as a way to insult him. So, like the small Musaylama, basically. The small Maslama. So his name is Maslama. And it's a common name in Arabia. He after the death of the king of that that Yamama area, his name was Hoda bin Ali. That king was a Christian king, by the way. He died in the beginning of the advent of Islam. And after he died, Islam spread within the Banu Hanifa, the tribe of Banu Hanifa. And Maslama was a sort of a spiritual leader in that community, and he accepted Islam. However, he was known as the spiritual leader of Yamama before Islam. He was, what we know, he was a Christian. Other Muslim sources don't really talk about him at all before the advent of Islam, but when you sort of study the puzzle around it, it seems that he's a Christian because the king was a Christian, he was a spiritual leader, so most likely he was. When the advent of Islam came, he accepted Muhammad as the prophet. However, he claimed prophethood as well. And after the death of the prophet, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he claimed that he's the continuation of this prophecy. This is the historical account from all Muslim sources that he claimed, he didn't deny Muhammad's prophecy, but he claimed prophecy or the continuation of prophecy after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. There are other people who sort of have the counter history, about it, the counter understanding about it, because in Arabia there are many Christians, and the Christians of Arabia at that time, and it is documented. Of course, you had Christians in the central area, Al-Yamama. You had Christians in the northern part where Taghlib are and where the Lachemids are. The Lachemids and the Ghassanids. Both of them were Christians. And then you had Najran, which was a city of Christians. So these were the sort of the hotspots. And Yemen, of course, they had a lot of Christians there. But these are the areas where the Christians were. So if you look into the language used in Arabic, when they describe sort of a priest, they would use the word that is similar to the word prophet or Nabi. Mm-hmm. So many would assume that, he wasn't necessarily claiming prophethood. He was merely sort of a priest of Islam, because that's the language that those people used. And this is many authors did claim this, but it's not the mainstream, obviously. But it is true that this is a word that the Arabs used to describe a spiritual leader, like a Rasul or a Nabi, even if he didn't have, divine revelation. So many, connect these two dots. So his story was, the mainstream story was that after the death of the Prophet, he claimed prophethood. He claimed that when Banu Hanifah, the tribe where he's from, that are from Central Arabia, when they went to Mecca, they sent an emissary to Mecca and they met the Prophet. They accepted Islam, and he claimed that the emissary claimed that the Prophet promised, if Musaylama lives after the Prophet Muhammad, if Muslim lives after the Prophet Muhammad, that he will be the continuation of the prophethood. And he's 30 years older than the Prophet Muhammad. He's the age of the Prophet's father. Of course, sources exaggerate. They say he died in the age of 140 and died, and this is obviously exaggerated. I assume that he died in his 80s, maybe in his 90s. He was described as a very old man during his death. The Prophet died in his 60s, so it makes sense that he was the age of the Prophet's father. The problem with the Islamic sources in history is that they tend to be very critical, and they haven't documented it in a academic manner, that the way they would have documented the hadith, or the way they have documented the history of the Prophet. If you read the revelation that he had, as they would claim that he had, a book and revelation, and if you read it, you instantly understand that there's no way this man claimed this came from God and his people accepted it, because the Arabs were took language and eloquent language, very important, and especially Najd. Najd is where all the poets came from. The mu'allaqat on the Kaaba, the writings of the poems on the Kaaba, all came from from poets from Najd. They went from Hijaz. Najd was very known for poetry. So to believe that this man brought these words and people took it was just silly, because if you read it, you say this is from a second grader. There's no way this guy wrote this. Like his verses would talk about the elephant with the long trunk, and it's so stupid and so silly. I mean, even in his time, there were poets from that same city that were absolutely phenomenal. So there's no way this guy wrote this. Probably attached to him later on with people basically taking him as as an insult, just making fun of him. Yeah.
So let's just hold on a sec. For anybody who's trying to kind of keep up and doesn't know what the terms are, so Najd refers to sort of Central Arabia, the region of Riyadh, and Hijaz is like the west coast, the region of like Mecca, Medina, Jeddah today.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yep. Very well explained. The Banu Hanifa, his tribe, have lived there since 200 AD. They migrated from the Hijaz, in fact, lived there 200 AD. So, and they still live there today. So, it's been a place where they live, and he came from that tribe. So, to follow on, what I think happened is, he might have, been a part of the political dispute that continued after the death of the Prophet, because after the death of the Prophet, many Muslims, rose and wanted to continue this leadership. They wanted to take the leadership. They didn't want to pay the tax to Abu Bakr and to Mecca. They wanted to be the center of the tax. Banu Hanifa was known, and the Yamama, the Najd, and that capital city, which is Hijr al-Yamama, where Muslima came from, was known to be more powerful in war than the Meccans. So I think they felt that they can pull it off, that they want to take the leadership of the Muslims. It was, in my view, a political dispute of not wanting to pay the zakat, or the tax to Mecca. He wasn't the only one that did that. He wasn't the first one also that sort of rebelled against Abu Bakr. That was Al-Aswad al-Ansi, that came from Yemen. He was the first one to actually claim prophethood. He claimed prophethood during the life of Muhammad, and he rejected the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. So he was the first one, and he was part of that apostasy wars. And the wars didn't start with the Banu Hanifa and Muslima or Muslima or Musaylima, whatever you want to call them, but it certainly ended in that final war, which was in Al-Yamama, the war against Musaylima. It was a very big war. It is counted as the war that killed most of the companions of the Prophet that memorized the Qur'an. That's why after that war, they rushed to sort of document the Qur'an, because they felt that we can't, people will die. So after that, Muslima was killed at that war in Al-Yamama, killed by Wahshi, the same guy that killed the uncle's prophet Hamza with a spear, and that is documented in poetry as well. He was a good-looking man, according to poetry, a big man, and the poetry, was very clear of who killed him, and that he, even in Muslim historical documentation, he did fight till the end. He didn't try to surrender or run away. So it is. I think the apostasy wars deserves its own episode, because it's really an interesting part of Islamic history. The whys, the whos, and what happened after. But at the end, Abu Bakr was able to unite the Arabian Peninsula and the Muslims, and gave way to the spread of the religion. Ending the Persian Empire and fighting the Byzantines.
So it seems to me, whenever I read historical sources about Arabia and the Islamic sources, there seem to be some gaps. So for example, you mentioned the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids, and I never see those terms mentioned in Islamic sources.
They have other names. If you read them in Arabic, Al-Ghassasina is the Ghassanids. The Lakhmids are called Al-Manadhira.
Okay.
They're not called the Lakhmids. Lakhmiyin is not a term used in Arabic. We say Al-Manadhira. They call them Al-Munzir ibn Ma' as-Sama', the son of the water of sky. So they have different sort of terms to them. But they are in very well documented in pre-Islamic history, at least. Not in post-Islamic history, you're right, because in post-Islamic history, they're sort of melded in the community of the Muslims. So there's no mention of any tribes post-Islam. I mean, they don't mention the Banu Hanifa, they don't mention Bakr bin Wa'il. Quraysh and Bani Umayyah obviously are mentioned, but the other tribes are not mentioned. Pre-Islam, you hear a lot about the other tribes. It has more sort of character. You can differentiate between the entities in the Arabian Peninsula, but that was intentional in the spread of Islam to sort of unify the Ummah. So there isn't really any mention of the Manadhira or the Lakhmids, but they're called the Manadhira. If you're going to read in Arabic, they're called the Manadhira.
Okay. So it seems like the history of Islam, history of Arabia pre-Islam in some of the earliest Islamic sources, but not necessarily the later ones, is just thought of as the Jahiliyyah, the ignorant time.
Yeah, I don't like that name, but yeah. I don't like that name because I mean, pre-Islamic Arabia is very, very rich. It's very rich in its poetry. It's very rich in its values. It's very rich in its history, even its accomplishment. I mean, the War of Dhiqar, you can spell it Dhigar, which is a war by the Bakr bin Wa'il and its branches of tribes against the Persians. It was a very, very wonderful story of chivalry and honor. And this was actually right before the advent of Islam. We have many stories, the love poetry, the culture and art. It's just amazing. I mean, the amount that you have pre-Islam is fantastic. There are two reasons why it's called Jahiliyyah. Now, Jahiliyyah, for people listening, it means ignorance, the era of ignorance. There are two reasons why it's called that way. One is because there was ignorance in seeking God. There's ignorance in religion, in theology, not in everything else. So people, I mean, Abu Bakr, Umar, the Prophet Muhammad, Ali, Uthman, Khalid bin Walid, all these people, they have already established themselves as men before the advent of Islam. I mean, their attributes were not made after Islam. They had the same attributes before Islam. Even in the Qur'an, it mentions that this religion doesn't want to come to change people. It just comes to embetter people, make them better at what they are good at already. And there's a verse in the Qur'an. I can look it up after. I don't have it on the top of my head. But it didn't came to teach people good manners, but it came to make their manners even better. So again, these values that these people held in Islam, these were values pre-Islam. I'll give you even an example. During the apostasy wars, the people of Muslima, the Banu Hanifah, they almost caught. They had a prisoner of war from them that was imprisoned by Khalid bin Walid. They wanted to capture him, and they came into the camp of the Muslims, and they found the guy. They wanted to take him back. They captured him. Actually, they found their captured brother, and they wanted to take him back. And at the same time, they found Khalid bin Walid's wife. So they, had an idea of, why don't we take his wife and capture her and take her ransom? Then maybe they'll stop these wars against us. And when they were about to take his wife, this is the Khalid bin Walid's wife. When they were about to take his wife, this man from their tribesman who was taken hostage, who they came to rescue, he stopped them and he said, "Have you forgotten the honors that we used to hold? The chivalries of war. I'm not going to allow you to take this woman." So he himself was supposed to be rescued, and he himself stopped his fellow tribesmen to take her. In that confusion, they just left him there and came back. So they didn't even rescue him at the end of the day. So the chivalry of war and those kind of things were very, very strong in Arab history. Even in the wars of the pagan Meccans against the Prophet, Ghazwat Uhud, which is the one that the Muslims lost against Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan could have killed all the Muslims. At the end of the war, they ran into the mountains to sort of take shield away from Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan already won that war. He could have killed every single one of them, including the Prophet, but he didn't, because and he said, "I'll see you next time," or "See you next year," or something like that. So this was part of their sort of, it was like a good sport kind of thing. So again, these values were there. That's why I don't like the Jahiliyyah. Now, the other reason why it was called a Jahiliyyah, I'm going to be a bit biased here, and Arab history and Islamic history, Arab history is entangled with Islamic history, and Arab history was not written by the Arabs. It was written by Persians. Written by Al-Ajam, as how the Arab will call it, was not written by the Arabs. And they, I reckon that, they really wanted to involve themselves and sort of, push away the importance of the Arab in the Islamic history. Many things make me say that, but one of the things is calling the pre-Islamic Arabia as al-Jahiliyyah. So I think that's the second reason.
One thing I've been doing a little bit of sort of cursory reading on this today, and it seems to me there's a bit of a sort of renaissance on actually learning Arab history from Arab sources, and there's a lot more interest in like archaeology in Saudi Arabia right now of the pre-Islamic period. Like, why do you think that is?
Okay, that's a very good question. The archaeology part is easy to answer. The archaeology part is because in the beginning of this third Saudi state, the one that united by King Abdulaziz in 1932, of course, when you ask me when was Saudi Arabia established, it was established in the 1700s. But in this last one, 1932, and the kings before King Salman, they understood that their archaeology is very vulnerable to being taken or stolen by archaeologists, because we saw what happened in Egypt, we saw what happened in other places. Their archaeology and their historical things were taken away, were stolen, were whatever, and we were really paranoid about that. We didn't want that at all. Because we actually had that happen to us with the Ottomans. The Ottomans took a lot of the things that were in Mecca, a lot of the things that were in Medina, and we didn't want our stuff to be taken away, basically. So we were in a vulnerable state. So we didn't want to open a can of worms that we couldn't sort of handle. And we were, in the process of developing the nation and infrastructure, and other things. Those are basically more important things to focus on. I think we reached a stage today where we can take care of our stuff, and we can, open this file that, I think we took a long time not to, but finally we did. And it comes with the many reforms that Prince Mohammed bin Salman has done. I mean, this prince really changed a lot of things. I mean, and one of them is what we're talking about now, the archaeology. This file was closed until, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman really opened it up, and it really opened a lot of things that we didn't know. A lot of archaeology in Riyadh even, but most importantly, we want to know the archaeology in the Hijaz, which is going to be very interesting. So that's why we didn't really dig into the archaeology. When we come to the history, and why we started to, as you said, talk about the history behind it. I think we've always talked about the history, except we've talked about it through the lens of the Islamic historians that have written this history, and whom again were not Arab. And so I think that we are retelling the story from our perspective, which was something that was not really given given the value that it deserves. And I think this is what is different. I mean, the historians you read from, the Muslim historians, all of them are not Arab, yani. So I think that it is written from somebody else's lens. We are now trying to pick up the puzzle and sort of write history the way it's supposed to be written, the proper way. And I think that's what's different.
Well, I was reading one thing earlier, that there's a sort of rock inscription in southern Arabia 100 years before Islam, which has the Bismillah Rahman, like in the name of God, in the name of Allah, the most merciful. So there's actually pre-Islamic usage of that, which is fascinating. People don't know if it's Christian or Jewish, but it's there.
It's similar, but it's not the same. It's not Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's I forgot what it is, but it's quite interesting. It's Bismillah, but it's not ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's something else, but similar. But it's not Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's something else, but similar. I can probably get it if you give me the chance. But it's Bismillah. There's something after that, but it's not ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's very similar though.
So let's take this in some phases that I'm curious to pick your brain on. So we've got the Arabia sort of between Abraham and Judaism phase. There's like different. There's just kind of like different phases of how religion works in Arabia. What do we know about religion in Arabia? Say, like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Do we know anything about that? What do we have?
We don't have a lot. I really don't know for sure, but the pre-Islamic Arabia is very well known near the Islamic time because of the fact that that time was very well documented. However, when you go 3,000-4,000 years ago, I'm not sure if we can even call it Arabia at that time, because as we know, I think Ismail was historically 4,000 years ago. Maybe Abraham was that time.
About then, yeah.
So when he reached the Arabian Peninsula, it wasn't Arabian. It was a Semitic people that didn't speak Arabic and were not a people that we know as a people today. And it was actually this admixture between Ismail and these South Semitic people in the Arabian Peninsula that created what you can call the Central Semitic people, or the Arabians. It was, I like to, make a point where the Arabs were born. It was when, Abraham, when God asked Abraham to send Ismail and his mother to the desert, and they reached Wadi Becca or Mecca. And when they were looking for water, Hajar was looking for water. She was going, going that way. Then she thought she saw water. It was a mirage. Then Ismail would cry. She would go back to Ismail, and then finally, like a gush of water gushed. That gush of water is when I see that the Arabs were that was the big bang of when the Arabs really became a people. Of course, Ismail, his name is in, I believe in Hebrew, means he who God listens to. Is that correct? Or he who God
that sounds
or he
like
who listens to
God has heard me, maybe.
God has heard me. In Arabic, asma' sama' is hearing, so that would make sense. Ismail,
yeah, heard by God.
Heard by God, yeah. So sama', I mean, that's an Arabic root word, sama', yasma', sama'. So heard. So heard by God, absolutely. So it's like when Ismail was crying, God gave them this gush of water that blessed them. So then the story, the South Semitic people met him, they lived among him, and then they became what we call today as the Arab. But the religions is a very interesting thing. It's very hard to pinpoint the dates, but at least we sort of know what were the religions. We know that pre-Islamic Arabia, it had multiple religions, and it's quite complex. They were basically varied, but from region to region. Most worshipped multiple gods. Polytheism was the name of the game, and they also venerated natural spirits, whom we call jinn, as with also sacred objects. And it was animistic in nature, meaning like they saw rocks, trees, springs as inhabited by these spirits, and they were of course idolatrous, meaning they worshipped idols. With their gods, they were represented by these idols or stones. There was in fact in the Kaaba, or around the Kaaba in Mecca, 360 idols. Each tribe or each clan would sort of have the honor to have their idol there, and they would have their own deity. Actually, in some scholars, they think that even the word Allah was known as the high God in the Meccan sort of pantheon. So regarded as the creator of gods. So this is where you have the shirk. You have the one God, the creator of God. Then you would have associate something with him as a smaller or demigod. So he was among many little other gods, and I think that these later on you had these tribal gods, god of rain, god of protection, fertility, god of victory in battle. But I will talk about the key deities in the Meccan pantheon. One was Hubal. He was identified as a chief god at the Kaaba. Most likely he was Mesopotamian in origin, and it was they had a triad of goddesses as well called the daughters of God, or the daughters of Allah. These were the Allat, Al-Uzza, wal-Manat. These were the most famous, gods that were present during the life of the Prophet Muhammad. The Lat, Al-Uzza, wal-Manat were very well known at that time, and they were very important for the whole Hijaz region. It wasn't even Mecca. Hubal's idol, which is a human-shaped figure, was inside the Kaaba, and it was associated with some with the moon, and Allat, which is a goddess. It was revered in a neighboring city, Taif. Other, later on in Islamic sources, they would describe her as the goddess of the underworld, and the goddess of fertility.
Okay, let me just draw something out here, because there's a jump some people make here, which I don't think is a good jump, but we should address it. So you're going to say, Hubal is the moon god. The logo of Islam is the moon. Therefore, Islam is moon worship.
That's very interesting, because that logo of the moon was taken afterwards. That wasn't the life of the Prophet Muhammad. That wasn't a symbol of Islam at all. It was actually, in fact, taken from Constantinople by the Turks. So even the Umayyads nor the Abbasids used that moon shape as a symbol of Islam. That was actually post the Sultanate of Rome, which later became the Ottoman Empire. They used that moon crescent as a sign, a symbol of Islam. That was foreign. That was foreign to Arabia. Even the Arabs don't use it in their flags. The true symbol of Islam is the Shahada, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There's no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. So that is actually the symbol through choreography. And the some would say that it's Allahu Akbar. The first flags were used Allahu Akbar and not the Shahada. So it's one of the two, but it's not the crescent moon. The crescent moon came afterwards, and somehow it became intertwined with like the crescent moon of Ramadan or something like that. But apparently it was taken from Constantinople after the Turks conquered that city.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to address that, because there's going to be people in the comments section being like, "Look, see,
see." Yeah, I agree.
So, anyway, continue.
Okay, so we got to the Allat. She was revered in Taif. She was the goddess of the underworld, the goddess of fertility. You have then Al-Izzah, which means the mightiest one, and it was a warrior god and also fertility god, a goddess. And they invoked sort of her for protection and for victory in war. Al-Manat, she was the goddess of fate, the goddess of time, and considered the oldest of these three goddesses, which is the Manat. So you have Al-Uzza, Al-Lat, and Al-Manat. And the early Muslim compilation of this Arab lore say the most ancient of these idols was Al-Manat, and the Arabs were so devoted that they even named their children after these deities. For example, you had Abd al-Manat, which meant servant of Al-Manat. And each idol has its own sort of shrine, its own temple. Al-Manat's idol stood by the Red Sea coast. Al-Uzza was in the desert east of Mecca, and tribes would undertake sort of pilgrimage or sacrifice there throughout the year. Now, Hubal was again inside the Kaaba. So many of these were inspired again by the Mesopotamians, inspired by the Greek gods. So it is basically an extension of that. Now, this is one side of the religions of Arabia. I want to talk about the other side, which is the monotheistic side, the Al-Hanafiyyah, which we would call in Arabic. And this term, the Hanafiyyah, plural would be, singular would be Al-Hanif. And in Arabic, it means the upright, the righteous. And it also, later on became, synonym with monotheistic. These were the people who sort of turned away from the idol worship, and they embraced sort of the belief of the one God, the God above, outside these tribal gods and these mini gods, and it was even outside the formal framework of sort of Judaism or Christianity. They didn't have script. They didn't have prophets. They believed in Abraham, obviously, and they believed in that that God of Abraham, but not in Judaism and Christianity. And they kept alive the idea of this absolute monotheism in that age of polytheistic Arabia. Now we know that some experts, key figures named as Hanifs include Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nawfal. You have Waraqa ibn Nawfal. Waraqa ibn Nawfal was the person who foretold the Prophet Muhammad, the person that the Prophet Muhammad went to when he received the revelation to ask him, what is going on? What is this that I just witnessed? And he was the guy that told him that you fit the prophecy. And he gave him the sort of the confirmation that he is a prophet. His name is Waraqa ibn Nawfal. He's the relative of Khadija, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad. He was one of these Hanafi people.
But I've heard him referred to as a Christian priest by Muslims before. Is that not right?
I've heard that too. And I've heard the Hanafi story too. So I mean, both I guess were heard. I think the Christian one is more well-known one, but I've heard the Hanafi one as well. So there's more than one. It's very hard to sort of distinguish. So yeah, we also have Christianity. Christianity, it reached Arabia in the centuries before Islam. By the 4th and 5th century, it was a very big part of the Arabian Peninsula. Again, we know that the Ghassanids, the Lakamids, the people in Medina, people in Najran, mostly Najran, and in Yemen, Christianity was a part of it. It came through the trade routes. It came through political alliances. There were Christian missionaries. There were merchants. It came through also the Roman or Byzantine Empire in the northwest of Arabia. It also came through the Ethiopian kingdom, the Aksumite kingdom, across the Red Sea. And there were Christians that sort of evangelized in Arabia to some extent. Meanwhile, the Persian Sassanid Empire to the northeast was a Zoroastrian, place originally and officially, but it also had many Christian subjects. So it also had an effect to spread sort of Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula. So I think that this is basically the three main regions where Christianity came from. From what I understood, Christianity was basically, it was sort of a Roman Orthodox in nature, and it was it's a sect that starts with the N. Maybe you can help me out. I'm not sure. Nestorian. There you go. So mainly Nestorian and what is known as a Roman Orthodox. I'll keep that for you next week to sort of give us your 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I won't go that far in the future, but I believe there have been Christian inscriptions found in Arabia going back to like 106 AD.
Okay.
So that
I know that there are coins.
Yeah.
That had the Byzantine coins and that were edited by the Arabs to have sort of an Arab leader in that coin, and it was Christian. So yeah, they found a church in south of Riyadh that was turned into a mosque, but they found out that it was even a church before that. So yeah, the Christianity was there. We know that many of these famous poets, famous figures were Christians. Again, like Hoda bin Ali, like many people of these cities that I described to you. So we also have Judaism. This is going to be one of the religions, but Judaism came to the Arabian Peninsula because of the exile that happened after in the second century, when the Romans destroyed the temple. So many of these Jews came into the Arabian Peninsula. We have three famous tribes that came to Medina: the Banu Qaynuqa, the Banu Nadir, wa Banu Qurayza. So these were the three tribes that were Jews. They came to the Arabian Peninsula. They are not ethnically Arabs. However, throughout the years they have sort of Arabized. Their culture is Arabic. They speak Arabic, but ethnically they are not Arabs. So the reason why they came, they were exiled. They came to Arabia to seek refuge from, after that temple was destroyed in the second century by the Roman Empire. Some even claim that some migration patterns could have been even before that, from the exile that happened during Babylon. So, they are not indigenous to the Arabian Peninsula. However, they have lived there for hundreds of years after that. During the time of the Prophet Muhammad, they were already very integrated into the society of Medina, integrating with the Arab culture. You also had Jews in Yemen, in that Himyar kingdom. That was very Jewish to an extent where people could call it a Jewish kingdom. And again, that was a mixture of those Jews who were exiled and some Yemenite Jews that converted into Judaism. These are the Jews in the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the people were talking about like earlier Jews than the second exile. During the first exile are onto something, because the nation of Israel and Arabia had like massive financial economic ties, and I think if you're looking to disappear from a giant empire to the north of you, going down south is a good plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially Arabia is a good refuge. It's very hard to conquer it from outside. So, it did keep the people living inside. It's quite safe. So it was a smart move. And finally, I think, lastly, I think this is maybe the least religion that was really, evident in the Arabian Peninsula, but it was there, which was Zoroastrianism. And it was mostly there in the eastern part of Arabia, obviously affected by the Persian Empire. But again, it wasn't a well-known sort of religion. It wasn't like, there weren't any tribes that were fully Zoroastrian, for instance. But you find that in Christianity, you find that in Judaism, and you find that in the other religions, but not in Zoroastrian. It was basically some sort of small pockets of peoples that not a full tribe or a full city or anything like that. I think that really covers the religions of pre-Islam.
That's fascinating. So you've got this very interesting tapestry of different ideas and different civilizations. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Arabia is not a name that originally came from Arabia itself, right? Isn't it an external name that's applied later?
Well, the Arabs call it Al-Jazira Al-Arabiya, or Shibh Al-Jazira Al-Arabiya, which means the Arabian Peninsula. That was named by the Arabs, for as long as, we imagine. But the word Arabia, we cannot, there isn't a word in Arabic that describes Arabia. We say the Arabian Peninsula, or the Peninsula of the Arabs. I think that's the best way to describe it, the Peninsula of the Arabs, or the Arabic Peninsula. But the Arabia, there could be some kingdom that was Arab, but it wasn't in the peninsula. It was somewhere in Mesopotamia, called the Kingdom of Arabu or something like that. I'm not very well versed on it, but there was a Kingdom of Arabia that wasn't in the Arabian Peninsula. It was just north of it. And I think that's where that word was taken by the Greeks and used. Of course, the Greeks or the Romans describe it as Arabia Felix, Arabia Deserta, and Arabia Nabatean, basically. So these were the three Arabias, but the Arabs have always called it the Peninsula of the Arabs, or the Arabian Peninsula.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you for all that information, and thank you guys for listening to the Al-Maida Initiative podcast. We will be back next week.